Welcome back to Alpha to Omega. Today we're going to be talking about the nature of being an author. So let's get right into it. There must be an author. As we talked about previously, if we conceive of this universe as a book, then we understand implicitly that this universe must be written into being. We're only really left with two options. One in which that the thing itself, the book itself, or the universe itself, and everything that it contains, it's writing itself into being at every moment that we experience it. Or, which is necessarily the case, there must be an author, beyond the nature of the world that is writing this book into being at every moment. As we concluded from previous videos, the second option can only be the case because as we observe the universe, we can see, just like a book itself, that we don't find the author in the book. We don't find the author or the one writing the universe into being at every moment in the universe itself. Therefore, that author must be beyond the nature of the world. The question, though, is what is the nature of the author, and how can we be certain of the findings that we conclude about this author? To read is to know. If we go back to our book analogy, the only way to know who an author must be without meeting the author directly, and even then, we really couldn't know who the author must be, it's only by reading the author's book do we understand their qualities, of what makes them an author. Specifically, as we talked about previously in our last video, that the author of the universe must have knowledge about how the universe must come into being, or the way in which it's structured, the power to actually do it, and the choice that they use to execute that power and knowledge into being. We know those things because we read the book of the universe. We couldn't otherwise know who the author must be except that we experience the world, we comprehend it, and we use whatever qualities that manifest upon the page of the universe, this face of the world, and conclude that the author must possess those qualities when they are writing the book of the universe into being at every moment. In other words, to read the book of the universe is to know who the author must be. There can be no other way, because we can't meet the author physically, by definition, because the author is beyond the nature of space and time. What is absolute? So if it means that the author must be beyond the nature of space and time, that author must therefore be absolute. The question, though, is what is absolute? What does it actually mean? Well, the answer is really what we just talked about. That absolute means it's beyond the nature of space and time. It can't be comprehended in its essence within the mind of the human being. Just like in math, there's the notion of infinite. Infinite cannot be comprehended. It can be known implicitly or necessarily that there must be infinite. For example, when we count the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and on and on and on, it points to the necessity of infinite, this entity that we call infinite. We can't, in essence, though, know what infinite actually is. We know that it must necessarily be. Likewise, the transient, ephemeral, discrete, concrete nature of the universe points to necessarily an absolute one in which is beyond the nature of space and time, therefore beyond the nature of ephemerality, beyond the nature of being confined to a space or a place. Anything that we impose in terms of our limitations, absolute must be beyond that. Absolute also has another implicit meaning. It means absolute dominion or ownership or lordship over a thing. If we go back to our book example, we see that the author not only is bringing the ink into being, or the letters and the words, but arranging them in a particular way at every moment, on every page, into sentences, into paragraphs, into chapters, into a complete story. Likewise, if we look at the world in and of itself, we see that not one particle in the entirety of the cosmos can be attributed to itself. It's being attributed to itself, such that we can say it brought itself into being. And not only did it bring itself into being, it is arranging itself in a particular way in harmony with all the other particles and things in the entirety of the universe. There is no such particle. In other words, all particles, or using the analogy, all letters are being brought into being at every moment on this page of the universe, arranged in a certain way that they form words that we perceive as objects external to ourselves and including ourselves, arranged again in a way in which they form sentences, so a comprehensibility, and paragraphs and chapters in a story, so that the entirety of the universe can be comprehended at once. And we cannot find one thing in the universe, not one iota, not one particle, that is misplaced and can be misunderstood. It is all comprehensible. And that is because the author must be absolute. It demonstrates it as such. Because the book in its entirety, from the most minute, the most micro, for example, the DNA that's in our cells and the cells themselves, to the macro, so to the sun, to the moon, the stars and the galaxies and all the heavens above us, they are all brought into being at every moment, at the same time, in a particular order and arrangement. Nothing in the universe can be said to be beyond that order or to escape his absolute authorship. If we make the matter more personal, we can think of things that we take for granted in our life, things that are crucial for our survival, but we don't think twice about. For example, if we just focus on breathing, the expansion and the contraction of our chest, that is important for us to survive. And if we step back and reflect, just as much as the sun and all the planets that revolve around it must be brought into being, must be written into being at every moment, so too our breathing, the expansion and the contraction of our chest must be written into being. So it can be said then, absolute or an absolute author necessarily implies that not only is he writing the sun and the moon and the stars and the solar systems and the galaxies and all the things that the universe contains into being at every moment, so too must he be writing my breathing and your breathing into being at every moment. That is the nature of absolute, in that nothing can escape that author. All ink on the page, all letters, all words, all sentences and paragraphs and chapters must be written into being at every moment, no matter how we perceive it to be complex or big or small is irrelevant. They are all contingent upon him, the eternally besought one. Now that we've established what absolute must mean and the relevance it has in the working order of the universe, not only for the celestial bodies, but for myself and yourself, then what does that further say about absolute? What does absolute imply? Well, if we said that the author must be beyond the nature of space, by definition we're saying that author must also be beyond the nature of time. That's what it means to be eternal, to have no beginning nor end. The question is, just like absolute, as we previously pointed out, is if absolute has a relevance in the life of this world, what does being eternal have in terms of its relevance in the life of this world? Or in other words, if the world is in need of an absolute author for it to be written into being at every moment, then it can be equivalently said that the world is in need of an eternal one, or an eternally besought one, to be at every moment. The question though is, what does that actually mean? I'm going to leave that question for you all to reflect upon. And until then, think about it. And I'll see you guys next time.